Howdy, y'all! So, we're approaching the end of the year, and I have been sitting on a video idea I've been wanting to do for a while, which is tier ranking all of the books that I've read this year. So, I have read about 68 books this year. I'll probably squeeze in one or two more before the end of the year, but I wanted to do this recap, so we're just calling it now on December 10th. And I'm not a booktuber at all. I rarely even share all the books that I read in a regular kind of cadence, but I really want to practice the art of retaining what I read and sharing about what I read and formulating my opinions about all of these books that I've spent many hours reading. So I thought this would be a good exercise for me to talk about the books that I've read and for you to get some recommendations out of it. So we're going to jump right in. I have 5 categories from worst to best. The worst category is just why, kind of regretting reading it at all. I try not to regret any books that I read, but I'm just like, why did I read that? The next one is that it passed the time. That's a bare requirement for reading a book. It should pass the time and feel like, it was a worthwhile distraction. The third middle category is that it entertained me. So it's a slightly better way of passing the time. The fourth category is that it moved me. I tend to read a lot of emotional, reflective books, so I imagine there's going to be a lot in this fourth category. And then the fifth top tier category is obsessed, would read again. And we'll see how many make that final cut. All right, let's dive right in. First, we have Portrait of a Body by Julie Delporte. She is a graphic artist, illustrator person who's written several books for Drawn and Quarterly, and they tend to be a marriage of visual essays and colored pencil drawings and reflections that she all hand writes. And so this is, I think, the third book that I've read by her. It's about gender and sexuality, and there's a lot of really beautiful colored pencil drawings of organic nature, and she kind of pairs that with women's bodies. So this one I read really quickly in the library, and I would say it was in the entertaining category. Like, it wasn't particularly moving, or I don't think it really impacted me in a way, but it was really beautiful to see. I just love her drawings and the very handmade textural quality of her work. So I would say entertaining. Next up is Winter by Ali Smith. This is the second in Ali Smith's seasonal series. So I've read Autumn before. I really liked Autumn. This one was Winter, and I read it very early in the year during winter. I would say this series is really great for people who like non-story novels, like very experimental books that are very vibey. Her books have a lot of beautiful sentences that are very fitting with the emotional texture of a season. I think one quote that I really like is, "It would be good to be full of holes, then all the things you can't express would maybe just flow out." So I thought that was really poetic and nice. But honestly, I can't tell you what the story was about, so that is something. But that doesn't really factor into my categories. A book does not need to have a plot for me to think that it is a good book. So I would say that it moved me. At least that line that I read you really moved me. Next is Between Two Kingdoms. I really loved this memoir. It's a few years old now. It's by Suleika Jaouad, and it's about her leukemia recovery. The relationship that she was in all throughout her recovery disintegrates pretty much as soon as she's recovered, and then she goes on a long road trip with her dog and starts to journal a lot more, and now she's like a very big Substack writer and has written another book that came out this year with a lot of journal prompts. I'm not the type to reread memoirs, but I do think that it's like higher than Winter in terms of moving, but I will still place it in that category just because I don't think I would really reread it per se, but very beautiful. Feeding Ghosts is a graphic memoir by Tessa Hulse, and she writes about the lineage of her mother and her grandmother and their story and how it's all intertwined. So Tessa Hulse has this journalist grandmother who grew up in China during the communist victory, and she is then tortured by the Chinese government and ends up with mental illness. And Tessa's mom is the one saddled with caring for her and is very protective. The book is really beautifully illustrated and required so much research. Tessa goes on a journey to China with her mom to trace all of the steps of her grandmother's upbringing. I know that the book took forever for the artist to create, and you can really tell in the pages. I think this was by far like my most favorite graphic novel that I've read this year. It was really an astounding story, and I loved the kind of self-inquiry that Tessa Hulse goes in as she examines her own family. And it's a long book. It's probably not for everyone, but I really enjoyed it. There's a lot of good food for thought. So yes, top tier, obsessed, would read again. Next up is Psalm for the Wild-Built by Becky Chambers. So this is a sci-fi book technically, and I don't read any sci-fi. I read maybe like one sci-fi book a year. But this one appealed to me because it is in the solar punk category. Solar punk means that it is envisioning a sustainable future interconnected with nature and community. And so it has more hopeful visions for society and the future, which appeals to me. So I really loved this book. It was very sweet, pretty short, very poignant, very like simply written and young adult kind of way, but really meaningful as well. So I would highly recommend this one, and I would read it again if I were feeling down. So obsessed. Next up is Real Happiness. This is a book on meditation by Sharon Salzberg, who is a very famous meditation teacher in America. And this was part of my yoga teacher training. I would say it is a good primer if you're a super beginner to meditation, but personally I found it dry and boring to read. And I would much prefer to read some other Buddhist authors like Pema Chodron or Thich Nhat Hanh. So I would recommend their books more. So sorry, Sharon Salzberg, but I would say this book just passed the time, and that's okay. Next up is More Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. So this is a healing fiction book. I believe it's the second in the series. I forget what the first one is called, but it has Morisaki Bookshop in the title. This one, it was a very cozy vibe. I really loved the main characters of this book with the bookseller and her uncle. So I think this book was really sweet. I would say it entertained me. Next, I read The Clothing of Books by Jhumpa Lahiri. This is a super short read. I think it's like 80 pages. And I read it in full at the New York Public Library one day when I was there. Honestly, I'm surprised that it is a book. I think only because Jhumpa Lahiri wrote it would it actually be published as a book and get a pretty beautiful cover as well. It could honestly just have been an article about her feelings about book covers and about the juxtaposition of a book cover with like its contents and the fact that authors don't really talk to the people who make their book covers and differences of book covers with different countries. So I think reading about all that was fascinating, but at the same time, this did not need to be a book. Sorry to say, but I think I'm going to put it in the just why category, just because I'm like, why was it a book? Next we have a novel, Shy Creatures by Claire Chambers. This book I really loved. It was a really sweet read. It's about an art teacher at a psych hospital in like the early 1900s or mid 1900s. And she bonds with a patient who's lived in complete isolation for decades, cooped up by his ants. And through the bond with the teacher and this patient, the teacher also gets to declare more of her own voice and find her own independence as well. So it's a really beautifully crafted story, and I found it pretty moving. So, moved me category. Next is A Prayer for the Crown Shy, which is a sequel to A Psalm for the Wild-Built. And this book is very similar to the first one. I think the main takeaway I have from this book is that I learned what crown shyness is, which is when all of the trees, when you look up, they'll kind of like barely be touching each other in terms of their crowns or their leaves. So they'll kind of know in the sky ecosystem to like share the space. And I thought that was a really beautiful observation in nature and a really meaningful message for how humans can kind of coexist and cooperate as well. So conceptually, I really loved that. I think if you were to read a book, I would recommend A Psalm for the Wild-Built, and then only if you're like really into it would I recommend the sequel. So I would put this in the entertain me category. Okay, time for a hot take. I read The Ministry of Time, which a lot of my friends have read as well, and for some reason, I just really hated this book. The one thing about this book is that it was a pretty zippy read. It is pretty plot driven, so I did manage to read it pretty quickly, but I think beyond 40% of the book, the rest was like a hate read, just to like see what happens and to keep hating on the book. So to rewind, I found out about this book through Obama's List last year. I saw it was about time travel, and I was like, okay, I'm sold. Like, that sounds really fun. I love time travel books. But the book was not that fun for me. It was way more about romance between the lead protagonist and a white captain guy from the 1700s. Their romance I was not into. And the protagonist I was also not really into. I didn't really feel her voice or personality very much. Overall, did not like. I do think it could be a good movie though, but I will say it is in the past the time category. I won't go just why, because it wasn't like fully off the mark like that, but it was not my favorite at all. Next is Allison by Lizzie Stewart. I love Lizzie Stewart's art so much. She does a lot of children's books, and she's done a few other graphic novels as well. But this book, Allison, is purely fictional, which is a first. I've owned this book for a few years. I picked it up in London maybe a few years ago. I would say the story is really good. It's about an artist who kind of finds her own path and begins her own career as like a shadow artist to this like other older male artist. But then she finds her own voice and path, and it features a lot of female friendships as well. I'm a sucker for that kind of story with art and women and all of those things. So I would say this moved me. I don't know if I would jump to read it again, but I could, but it definitely moved me. This next book is called The Science of Last Things, and the book is about time and self and abstract concepts like that. I think this was honestly one of my favorite essay collections of the year. I think the top one, because it delves into really interesting explorations of very big concepts of like how we consider time, what pain is like, what does the self mean to us, how do we record these things through like cameras or map them out in terms of the human body and anatomy. So all of this was super fascinating to me, and I took so many notes reading this book. And one quote I'd like to share from this is, "To wait in this way means simply to bear witness to breath, the gift of wakefulness, as it lights up, here, now, in this accidental vessel that is myself. It asks nothing more of the time that remains." So I just loved this reframing of waiting as time that remains. I honestly feel like that's a more hard-hitting meditative quote than what I read in Real Happiness, for example. This was definitely a top favorite. I would absolutely read it again. I think there's just lots to digest and take away each time you read a book. Next, I read Tove Jansson's The Illustrators. I've read a bunch in this illustrator series, which always covers a singular artist. I would say this is my least favorite illustrators book, which is sad because it's about Tove Jansson, whose work is amazing. But I just didn't feel like it delved as much into her work or career as it could have. And it's funny because she has such a big catalog of work, and maybe it is because of that, the fact that you can like read her own books, her own nonfiction works, or her letters to learn more about her life than this sort of biography. So I think this book passed the time, and it was a good rudimentary intro, but not necessarily one I'd recommend to collect if you're into Tove Jansson. Next up is a book called One Simple Thing. It is about the science of yoga, and it was another required book for my yoga teacher training. And this was by far the best book from my yoga teacher training. It was written by an Ashtanga yoga teacher named Eddie Stern, and it really delves into the 8 limbs of yoga and is explained very well. I think there's a lot about yoga that can be really hard to digest, so this book was a very good primer into core Sanskrit words that are used, core concepts, all of that stuff. So this, I think, would be a definite reread. So much yoga knowledge all in this one book. Next up is Winter Hours. We're still in books I read last winter. So this book is from Mary Oliver, and it is a combination of her poetry, prose poems, and essays. And I really like this combination of all of her work because I really love a lot of the essays that she wrote, like in her collection Upstream, and obviously her poetry is beautiful too. Honestly, like, how can you hate Mary Oliver, right? She's just such a balm for the soul. So I would say this book moved me. I don't know if I'd go back to it just because there's a lot of other Mary Oliver I haven't read. But yeah, would recommend. Next up is The Hustle Cure. This is a self-help book about not hustling or trying to lessen the desire or pressure to hustle. And I read this because my sister told me she read it and found nuggets of it helpful, and I have surprisingly not read much self-help this year, but usually I read a lot, so I just wanted to see what it was about. And I would say I think it was like a pretty forgettable self-help book if you've read a lot of self-help. The MO of this book is that you can't do everything and you should prioritize joyful things because those will restore you. So that's my TLDR of the book. I would say that it passed the time. Next up is A Thousand Feasts by Nigel Slater. So Nigel Slater is a food writer. I definitely got recommended this book somewhere in some newsletter or something. And I really enjoyed reading this book, but it took me forever to finish because it is in all these like very beautiful vignettes of him eating or how his like beautiful British kitchen is laid out, that sort of thing. So there's no propulsion to the book, but it is a very cozy, beautiful kind of book for its atmosphere. So I would say it's not a moving book, but it is very entertaining, and his words of how he describes food is so freaking good. Next is The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So this book is specifically about the gift economy and reciprocity as an economic principle rather than capitalism. And it's a short and sweet read. I think it can honestly be a really good business book to reorient how you think about the market or how to like give and share and take things from each other. So it was a really good lesson. I would say it moved me in terms of its concepts. Next up, we have Mina's Matchbox. So this is a novel by Yoko Ogawa, and I have read several of her novels before. I've read The Memory Police as well as The Housekeeper and the Professor, and I would say I like both of those novels more than this one. This one is just kind of middling. Like, I don't want to go too much into the plot, but it involves a hippo, which is fun. But it doesn't have the same emotional resonance that I feel like a lot of her work does. So I would say it was entertaining a bit. Actually, I might put in the pass the time category just because it didn't hit as hard. Next is These Precious Days. So this is an essay collection by Ann Patchett. She is a fantastic novelist, and therefore her essays also read as stories, which is not a bad thing at all. I think it makes for a very good personal essay. But all of these things, even on paper, they don't sound interesting. I think the way she writes them makes every little tidbit or story sound super interesting, and it's very narratively tight, and there's not ever a section where I'm like, why is she still talking about this? So I think this was a very good book, very entertaining. All right, next I have I'll Love You Forever by Jie Kwan. So this is a book about K-pop. It's a memoir and essays interweaving cultural criticism of K-pop and the industry. I have a lot of thoughts about this memoir. Overall, I'm glad that it exists, that it got published, and I love the overall form of cultural criticism plus personal narrative. But the book needed a lot better editing. I think it was very repetitive in terms of some of the points that were being made in the book. And I have some thoughts about its structure. Like, on one hand, it was really fun to see all of the chapters broken out by a certain celebrity or K-pop group, but it also felt like the related topic for each section was not really always clear. I don't want to go too on about the book, but I would say it passed the time. Next is Bodywork by Melissa Febos. So this is more of a craft book on writing memoir, but it's also a memoir. And I haven't actually read any of Melissa Febos' work. I know she has written about her sex work before. Did she write about a year of celibacy? She has written very personal stories about her and her body and very physical experiences. And this book was really good for guiding people on how to write very honest memoir, how to write very brave and vulnerable writing, and how it's obvious when that isn't happening. It made me realize I am not ready to write a memoir. Like, I don't think I can write as honestly as Melissa Febos is encouraging me to right now, but maybe one day. But I think overall it was really moving in terms of thinking about the craft of writing personal stories. Next we have This Time Tomorrow by Emma Straub. She's a novelist who owns bookstores in my neighborhood called Books Are Magic. And this one I wanted to read because it is also about time travel, and I wanted to cleanse my palate of the Ministry of Time, and I loved this book. It was a book about a father and his daughter, and they can both time travel. The daughter time travels back to when her father wasn't sick and gets to have more special experiences with him that way. And the book is set in Brooklyn. It made me cry a lot. This was all in all very, very good book for me. So obsessed. Next is Spiral and Other Stories by Aidan Koch. I loved the art of this book. I also featured it in a newsletter from earlier this year. I just love her art style, which is very abstract. Honestly, I forget what the book is about. I'm more focused on the art than what the actual words might be trying to convey. This book, it was about people and nature and the relationship of those two together. If you're not into abstracted art, if you're more of a comics person who needs narrative storytelling, this book is absolutely not for you. But if you're more of like a museum goer and like to fill in the gaps yourself, then I think this would be a really good book. So I would say entertaining. Next up is The Anthropologists by Icicle Savas. This is a pretty short book. It's a book about a couple trying to find a place to live in their city. They're grappling with being on the edge of adulthood and figuring out whether they belong to the city, where they want to be, how they want to root themselves. I think the book was enjoyable to read. I would say I think I would have bonded with it more if I read it earlier in my life, like in my mid to late 20s. I think where I am now, in a different head state where I'm not necessarily grappling with a lot of the questions that are being raised in the book. So I think once upon a time it would have moved me, but now I would say that it entertained me. Next is Your Head is a Houseboat by Campbell Walker. So this guy is Struthless on YouTube. I love his YouTube channel and I wanted to support him and buy his book as well. And he is a fantastic illustrator. He illustrated all of these different characters living on a houseboat together to represent anxiety in one's brain. And he really uses this metaphor to categorize how our brain can kind of both help us and hurt us with all of the different constructs and rooms that it builds. So I thought the book's organization and overall metaphor was really strong, and it was very entertaining and helpful as well. Next up is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. This book, it was really cute. It was about a children's author who comes out of retirement and has one last book for people to read, but he will only sell it and show it to anyone who wins a riddle competition. A bunch of people enter, and I think like 5 people get chosen, and they all get shipped off to his island and then have to go through a series of games in order to win the book. I think the book's premise was really fun, and the execution was quite great as well. And I think if you are a fan of Harry Potter or The House in the Cerulean Sea, then I think this one would be a really good fit for you. So entertaining. Next up is The Lightness by Emily E. Temple. This book I had not heard of, but I got it from the Little Free Library, and it appealed to me because it's about hijinks that happen at a meditation retreat for teenagers. And I had just gotten back from a meditation retreat myself for adults. There wasn't enough action happening for it to be a propulsive thriller. So I would say, I don't know if I want to do just why or pass the time. I will be generous and say that it passed the time. Next up is We Need Your Art by Amy McNee. So Amy writes on Substack. I really love her inspirational posts on why we all need to be creating, and I think there's a lot of really helpful strategies for people who want to create but are blocked or scared. I really love the matter-of-fact language that Amy uses here, and there's just a lot of possibility that opens up in terms of your excuses to yourself or like the perfectionism that you might feel. There's an answer or treatment for everything. So I would say I would honestly read this again. I thought it was a very good structured book and down to earth and helpful. There is a lot of swearing though, not a bad thing. Next is The Future by Naomi Alderman. So this is the writer of The Power, which was a really big book many years ago. This one is about tech founders who panic and gather after a big moral disaster happens, and I thought it was written very well in terms of how tech founders and CEOs would really behave. The pacing for the book was really good. All of the different characters were really unique and fun. There was no gap in terms of a character I didn't care about. If The Ministry of Time were like this book, but with time travel, like that would have been perfect for me. That would be what I expected. But alas, different. I really like this book. I feel like it didn't move me, but it feels wrong to put in this category. But I will say it wasn't like a moving kind of book, but it was highly entertaining. So I would put it at the top tier of the entertaining category. Next, we've got White on White by Icicle Savas. So this is the same writer as The Anthropologists, and I was recommended this book by Brandon Taylor after I shared with him my abandoned K-pop idol novel, and then he recommended me this story of obsession and where does the border of me end and you begin, and how we see other people versus how they see us. It sounds very esoteric when I say it like that. In terms of the plot, I would say it's about a woman in grad school who ends up befriending this woman artist who's the wife of the professor's place that she's staying at, and then their relationship just gets more and more interesting as they kind of observe each other. And they're like friends, but they're not really friends. This book was tonally very, very different from The Anthropologists, which is a much lighter, kind of more obvious book. This book ends in a complete mindfuck, which I liked just because it fell out of left field, but then it also didn't at all. So I would say this book moved me. It was very surprising in terms of its ending, and I wouldn't say I was obsessed, but I would consider reading it again now that I have the full context of what the writer was trying to do in the book and see if I can see all the nuggets of the point she was trying to make. Next up is The Unreality of Memory by Elisa Gabbert. So this is an essay collection that came out in 2017, so it's pretty old. But I think a lot of the subject matter is pretty timeless in terms of how we deal with disaster and fear and how memory operates in our brain and about the concept of self again. I guess I really like reading about what people think about the self. I thought this book was really good. There's a lot of great philosophical reflections. It's very well researched. There's a lot of good scientific tidbits. It was also nice that the writer is a bit present in the books in terms of her personal narrative, but not overtly so. So it feels very tightly written, and the book is expansive, but also complete as a collection. It's kind of hard to explain why. I'm still practicing my criticism skills, but I would say overall, I would really recommend this book and I would read it again. Next is Everything Beautiful by Ella Francis Sanders. Ella is a wonderful illustrator, writer. She also has a column in Orion magazine, and I think she has another book coming out next year. This is the first or second book I've read from her, and it is a meditation on beauty and what beauty means. It's a good palate cleanser kind of book. It's a good reminder of how we consider beauty and expanding our definition of beautiful things. Generally, I feel like these books are hard in the publishing market because they're hard to really deeply engage with. I think people see art books as beautiful, but they also put these things in the gift book category. Meditative art books are in this middling ground for publishers. This book, it might have been nice to have longer essays about beauty. I really loved being in the world of this book, but it was a really quick read because there's only so many words and pages of art in there. So that's just something that I'm thinking about in terms of how I want to make work for eventual books, and as I make my zines as well. So overall, I think this book entertained me. It was really lovely. But I think I needed a bit more time to linger with its contents to put it in the moved me category. Next up is Good Material by Dolly Alderton. So this book is about a breakup told from a man's perspective, and it is a very fun book. I am so impressed with how Dolly Alderton was able to write so well a male character. And of course, I'm a woman, so I can't say for sure if she nailed it or not, but it felt like she nailed it, especially in terms of how men aren't able to support somebody going through a breakup in the same way that women and women's friends can. The writer never looked down on the man as she was writing this, and it was very empathetically written from both sides. A big part of the book is that the fact that the breakup happens in their 30s, after a lot of their friend groups are already settled down, and the sort of difficulties that emerge from that specifically. It's like the unique loneliness that comes from a breakup in your 30s when your social circle is different than how they operated in your 20s. So overall, this book was not a moving book, I think, but it was highly, highly entertaining. Next up, we've got I'm Laughing Because I'm Crying by Youngmi Mayer. So this is a memoir by comedian Youngmi Mayer, who also used to being married to the founder of Mission Chinese. So I did partially read it to find out more about how they met and all of that stuff. I think the strongest thing about this memoir is that Youngmi Mayer has a voice. She has a voice in all caps. She has a very strong sense of humor, and that humor is very expressly felt in the words. I think she does a really good job of using humor to get through or explain very sad moments in her life. And that's kind of the MO of the whole book. You know, I'm laughing because I'm crying. If a memoir is to express who you are and what you represent, I think she knocked it out of the park. So I would say this book also entertained me. Next is We Were Made for These Times by Kyra Jewel Lingo. This is a bit of a light book in terms of content, but it was really good for reflecting and moving through change. So Kyra Jewel Lingo is also a meditation teacher, and these are 10 points that goes through how one can move through change and how one can be resilient through tough times. So I think if you are a person going through tougher times, this would be a really nice book to read. I think where I was in life, it was not necessarily a book that I really had to read, but it was good nonetheless. Next up is Audition by Katie Kitamura. This book is, I don't know how to explain in words. There's basically 2 parts to this book, and they're both, you know, have all the same characters, but the characters' relationships are a bit different in each, and so it kind of exposes 2 different versions of a story. And I cannot tell you what the purpose of that choice was. I don't know how to feel about this book because I still don't really get this book. If someone understands this book and has read it, please explain to me what you thought. But I personally, you know, I thought it was an interesting exercise as a reader, and I'm sure it was a very fun one as a writer, but I think I much preferred her past novel Intimacies as the ultimate Katie Kitamura book to read. Next up is The Wife by Meg Wolitzer. I have read several Meg Wolitzer books, and they are all fantastic, so I knew this book would also be pretty good. This book is 22 years old. It still absolutely holds up. It is still a very good book to read. I think the only thing is that this kind of story has been done quite a bit since then, but it would probably have been very revolutionary to read back then, 22 years ago. The story is that there is this famous writer. He's just won a big award. Much of his life is supported by his wife. It's really about the wife of this writer and how she kind of holds everything up. Yes, book entertaining. Ultimate favorite Meg Wolitzer book is The Interestings. And then after, I would rank The Female Persuasion, and then this one. Next up is The Outrun. This book is a memoir by Amy Liptrot, and I read this because I went to Scotland and I wanted to read something by a Scottish writer, and then I found this. This book is about the writer's recovery from alcoholism and trying to go sober. She moves back to Orkney Island, which is in like a very northern part of Scotland, very remote. And there is no way I would have read this book if I've never been to Scotland. But since I have been, I think it was a very enlightening book to learn a lot more about Scottish culture, their relationship to farming and nature, and paralleling that all with her sobriety journey. It was a very fantastic memoir. She listened to the notes of Sharing Honestly as outlined by Melissa Febos. So I think this is a very fantastic book that was very moving. And if you don't want to read it, there is also the Saoirse Ronan Netflix movie version of The Outrun if you want to watch that instead. Next up, we have Pride and Prejudice. So I think we're in the summer now. Like, these were books I was reading in the summer. This book is a classic. I don't need to explain what this book is about. It is a love story. It is a story about family. It was my first Jane Austen book. It was really good. I would absolutely read it again. And it was so much fun. Kicked off my Austen reading journey. Next up is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. It's a really good novel with a very strong POV of a character with lots of quirks and problems. I think this book is good for the artistes, and I would rank this pretty high. Like, this book was good. Did it move me? I think it's in the moved me category. I think during the summer I would have said obsessed, but now that I think about it, I don't know if I would necessarily reread it, but I would definitely read it for the first time again. Next is Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. I have read all of her books because they're just quick, zippy, fun reads. I would say every additional Emily Henry book I read, I kind of forget what it's about like a month after I read it. And that is how I feel about this book. It's about two different writers or journalists covering the story of a person who used to be famous. I feel like the romance wasn't super strong. The book's overall premise wasn't that strong, so I would say this book just passed the time. Next is The Summer Book by Tove Jansson. This was a really sweet book, one that I've been meaning to read for a while. It's about a grandmother and her granddaughter named Sophie, and how they spend their time on the island in the summer, somewhere in Finland. And the book is told in vignettes. The trouble I have with this book is that some stories are super boring, and then other stories are like so sweet and heartfelt, and I just like completely feel how the grandmother feels and Sophie's intense emotions and the interactions they have between the two. And so it's very back and forth in that way. So because of that, I'm going to put it in the middle category of entertaining, just because some were moving and other stories passed the time. So maybe we'll call it even and put it in the middle category. Next is Summer Solstice. So this book, it's a very short book. I think there's a summer version and a winter version, both about the solstice. I would recommend this book as a very poetic book about the season of summer. It's a very vibey book, lots of really, really rich and evocative memories associated with summer, ones you read and you're just like, that is summer. So I think this was, again, a quite entertaining book with lots of good snippets. Well, now that I look at this, I'm like, how has winter and moved me, and this book isn't entertained me, but you know, we're gonna keep on. Next we have Modern Lovers by Emma Straub. After The Hitter, that was This Time Tomorrow, I wanted to read another Emma Straub book. So this one is a book with a more of an ensemble cast. It's still in Brooklyn. I think this book is a lot funnier than This Time Tomorrow, which is a bit more sad. Honestly, I like sadder books than funnier books, but this is a very good beach read because there's lots of fun hijinks that happen. But I would say it passed the time. It was a solid novel, but it was not one that really stayed with me in any way. So a very good beach read. Next up is Goodbye Things, which is a book about minimalism. This book was really funny because the Japanese writer who writes this book is very self-aggrandizing, but I think that there were some really good snippets in this book, like how the writer considers the square footage of a space and divides that by each item. Say if you're paying like $5,000 in rent and you have a printer that takes up 100 square foot of your 500 square foot apartment, then it's like X amount of rent that you're paying for that printer to be there, which is not something I've really thought about in terms of paying rent for those items to be there. That being said, I don't know how I really feel about minimalism because, I don't know, as an artist, I just love collecting things too, and that's part of my personality and practice to see things and appreciate them. So I feel like there's a balance to be had in terms of not overwhelming oneself, but also appreciating it and collecting things that, you know, can be loved in this world. So overall, I would say I can't give it the just why category because it wasn't all bad, but it passed the time. Next is My Name is Lucy Barton by Elizabeth Strout. I don't know if I love this writer. Everything she writes is kind of meant for you to cry. This book certainly was meant for you to cry. I might have cried, but it was not my particular flavor of sad. And there were parts of it that were really boring about the main character's backstory. So I would also say this passed the time. Next is To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. This book took me a while to read, but it took me a while because there were so many good sentences in this book. So many of the descriptions, lots of claps, lots of snaps. It's so good. And I think this is a book I would definitely return to again, just to understand people, understand what goes through people's minds. I really love the character Lily Briscoe, who is the painter in the book, and how she thinks about art and aging. Next is A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. I love a whimsical, magical story, and Sangu Mandana, who's the author of this book, is really good at that stuff. And so I think her first book was more of a favorite than this one, but this is also really fun. It has a fun fox character, good cozy vibes happening, and lots of good magic. So I would say entertaining. Next is The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. I cried so much reading this book, and I absolutely love this book. It is a book told in letters, so it's all about letters of the main woman protagonist, and letters about her and letters to and from her. And so you can kind of see the person's life through her letters, which is really sweet, and also cry from them. Obsessed. Next is Into the Magic Shop, which is a memoir by James Doty, and it is a book about manifestation written by a neurosurgeon, and it also inspired BTS's famous song Magic Shop. There's a lot of lore about this book, which is why I wanted to read it. The author meets this manifestation teacher in the back of a magic shop, completely changes his life, gets him rich and whatever. I don't know how I feel about this book, but it is a very honest and interesting kind of book. So I would say it passed the time. Next is Margot's Got Money Troubles. This book is wacko, but really fun. I mean, the premise is this young woman gets pregnant, she has her kid, she has her wrestler dad move in with him, and then she starts an OnlyFans account to make money. So the premise is wild, but the characters are all really sweet and they all feel real. The work feels honest about this kind of like sex work, internet work, and it manages to stay funny the whole time and very human. So I would say this book moved me. It was really good. Next is Where'd You Go, Bernadette? This was a book I read during my Seattle trip because I wanted to read a book about Seattle. Bernadette is an architect who has her dream project that she finishes. It blows up, figuratively speaking. And so she falls off the map and kind of slowly starts losing it. It's another epistolary novel where a lot of it is told through emails and documents. I guess I like epistolary novels, so this too, I would say, moved me. All right. Next is Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, who is one of my favorite novelists. This book is told by an English butler who is taking a bit of a road trip to visit a former employee of the house that he used to work at. And what I love about Ishiguro's writing is that it's so restrained, and yet it can still make you feel emotional, even though there's nothing overwrought about the language at all. And this is especially true in this book, because he's a freaking butler. His life's work is to not show emotions or show that he's ever bothered by anything. So I think all of that understated prose that Ishiguro's good was really fitting for this book. And yeah, I'm all for an emotional book that is not overtly emotional. It's a skill that I do not know how to cultivate, but studying his work would do it. So absolutely moved me. Next is The Original Daughter by Jemima Wei. So this book I'd heard because I have some friends who went to a writer's residency with this author, and I think this is her debut book. It's about two sisters who grow up in Singapore. One becomes a famous celebrity. I love books about sisters. There's a lot of talk about sacrifice for family and ambition and how those are held together and how family members take turns doing those things too. I would say the latter half of the book became kind of slow, and the protagonist was a bit frustrating to read, though maybe realistically frustrating. But overall, it was a really entertaining book, and I really loved the relationship of the two sisters and the sort of complicated nature of that. Next is Your Attention is Sacred, which is a short manifesto by Amelia Ruby, who runs a podcast called Off the Grid about leaving social media. So this book is also a manifesto about leaving social media. And what I really love is how much Amelia delves into etymology and metaphors of gardening as alternative ways to cultivate one's attention outside of the internet. And I especially loved her critique on the culture's obsession with flow state as the pinnacle of how we pay attention to something, and how that in itself can be a trap as well. So this book, it moved me in the sense of its concepts. Next is Making Time by Maria Bowler. This is another creative manifesto of sorts of how we can perceive time, trusting the impulse to tend toward creative ideas, not feeling like we have to be at the behest of productivity and like checking off all our tasks. And these are just reminders I always like to have every so often. So I enjoyed reading this book by her, and there's a lot of really beautiful one-liners that I highlighted. I would love if this book was just like a slow drip through my veins that I could hear year-round, or every week or something, get a little passage from it. I think it's good in a bedside table kind of way. So I would say it entertained me. Next is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This book was a banger. It was my first Donna Tartt book. The first half was so good. I was super into all of the Latin academia stuff that was happening, even though I barely understood half of the references. It was delightfully pretentious, and I loved that. It was very well paced. I think it's a classic for a reason, and I would definitely reread this one. It is quite long, though. Next is Journal of a Solitude by May Sarton. I read this book all year, and I tried to read it like pretty close to the day that May Sarton wrote her journal entries. She's a poet, and she wrote this during the time that she lived alone in New Hampshire, I believe. And it talks about her living alone, her loving to garden, needing alone time to write, but also about her relationship and the ups and downs of that. This book was amazing. I related so much to May's writing. I also feel like I saw bits of my future being an elderly grandma, gardening and feeling the gift of solitude year round, but also feeling the depths of loneliness as well, and how those are simultaneously held, and the sort of rhythms of how one feels that throughout the year is very obvious when you read this book. So I think getting to read writer's diaries is really special in this way, and this one is one that she published herself, so it feels nice when, you know, the writer is granting you access to their own journals. Next is Any Person is the Only Self by Elisa Gabbard, who also wrote The Unreality of Memory. So Any Person is the Only Self is specifically about books and literature and her love for reading. So there's a lot of different essays about writers, about Sylvia Plath, about Frankenstein. I did not like this book though. I think there were certain tidbits that were interesting. It was again well researched. She clearly did a lot of reading and reflecting for it, but I don't really want to read about people writing about authors all that much unless there's a greater conceptual thing that's holding that thread together, and I don't feel like that there was beyond literature itself, which is too broad of a conceptual tie for me. So I think this book, oh, sorry, it passed the time, but her other book, obsessed. Next is Heart the Lover by Lily King. I have raved about this book to everyone I know. I devoured this book within a matter of hours. It was so good. It starts as a campus novel, and then kind of dives into later in life with the same characters. Where I even began. I mean, the book, the writing is so good, the emotions are so good. I cried a lot, obviously. It was just really a really good book. Texturally, like, reminded me of Normal People in terms of the campus love story, but then you get the fast forward into their future, and then you feel all the feels of middle age and, you know, the meaning of life, that kind of thing. So it was just really good. So next up, I read Writers and Lovers, which is by the same author, Lily King, and the books are a bit related. No spoilers as to exactly how they're related, but I figured after reading Heart the Lover, I wanted to go back and reread Writers and Lovers, which I read in 2020. It was still really good. I would say it moved me. I think Heart the Lover is like miles better than Writers and Lovers, personally speaking. They both have a good amount of writing about writing because the main character is a writer in both of them, and reflections on being alone and sacrificing for art and relationships. And those are all things that I love reading about. So yeah, I would recommend both of them. Next is Hamnet, which is currently a movie out in theaters with Jesse Buckney and Paul Mescal. And I wanted to read this book before the movie came out so I could properly do a book versus movie comparison. Overall, I think the book provided a lot more context and deep dives into this world of Shakespeare's wife, Agnes, and Shakespeare, who is never actually named in the book, as well as their dead son, Hamnet. But the book was gorgeously written. Maggie O'Farrell is an amazing writer. It moves quite slowly, and it is not a book that you would read because, like, the plot is exciting. It's honestly really sad because, you know, a child is dying in the book. But it is overall a really good reflection on life and death and how art can play a role in those things. So it is a really moving book overall. Next is Northanger Abbey, which is my second Jane Austen novel. I chose this book because it was the fall and I wanted to read a book with a gothic flavor, and this is Jane Austen's parody of a gothic novel. A lot of people seem to hate this book. I'm not sure why, because I think the book was really funny. I really appreciated the humor in a way that it's not really as present in Pride and Prejudice. There's a lot less like romance happening than Pride and Prejudice, so perhaps that's why people don't really love it. There's also some detestable characters in Northanger Abbey, which might also be a cause for frustration. But overall, it's a really funny book, it's tightly written, and it is very entertaining. So yeah, Jane Austen. Next is I Came All This Way to Meet You by Jamie Attenberg. This is her essay collection / memoir, and it is really about a writer's devotion to writing. And it explores her as a single middle-aged woman and talks a lot about her travels as well. So it's kind of a hybrid of those three categories. I think the through line perhaps was her devotion to writing, but I think I could tell from a lot of these essays that they were once published elsewhere on the internet. And sure enough, a lot of these essays were previously published and then were compiled and probably edited to fit into an overall book. I feel like if a reader can kind of sense that, like, then the essays are feeling a bit disparate. I think maybe what's hard is, like, for example, These Precious Days, there was also not necessarily a clear through line about that book. But perhaps because there was less of a through line, it like worked to just be more about like her life. Whereas this felt like there was almost a through line about travel, middle-aged single woman, or writing, but it didn't ever have a fully developed concept about all three interwoven in a way. I think that it might be my slight hang up about the book, but still working through exactly what that difference is in my head. But overall, I would say the book was very entertaining and inspiring to read. All right, we're almost at the finish line. Next is Mornings Without Me, which is a Japanese novel. It's about a woman and her cat. And it's funny that the book is called Mornings Without Me because most of the book is about mornings with me. Me is her cat, and the cat is alive for most of the book because she talks about her and her cat. The book made me want a cat. It was very sweet. It was very poetic. There's a lot of poetry that ends every single chapter because the protagonist is a poet in the book. And it was a very sweet relationship about, a woman and her cat. So I would say entertaining. Last in this series is The Wedding People. So this was a very popular book. I believe it came out last year, and it is about a woman who's divorced and wants to go to Rhode Island and commit suicide because she's feeling really depressed. And then there's a wedding happening in the same hotel that she's staying at, and then the bride and this divorced woman meet and they become friends, and better things happen. So this book, honestly, it was really good. I was very into reading it once I got started. There was a lot of good thoughts about midlife and about how people feel kind of stuck in their ways and how we can refresh the possibility of life, even if we've been entrenched in our ways. Even when you're a young person, like the bride, you can still tunnel into certain ways of behaving or seeing yourself. And so all of this was reflected in this story, and it was a romance but also like a friendship novel. So I really liked how it waffled between all these genres and moved in a really nice way. And also the protagonist, she's a professor and she's really nerdy, and I thought that was fun. So yeah, I would say, I don't know if I would I read it again? I tend not to read books like this again, so I'll say it moved me because there were a lot of moving passages. And so concludes my tier ranking of my books from 2025. So I guess I am a pretty generous ranker because I only have one Just Why book. If I were honest, I feel like I might move this to Just Why. There was just something that I really didn't like about the book all too much, so I'll put one more there. And then we have pretty full middle categories and then a pretty light top category. 3 of these are classics for a good reason. Feeding Ghosts. Now that I am seeing this list again, I don't know if I would necessarily reread it. So I would move this to the Move Me category as well. So this leaves me with 12 in the top category, and then 18 here, and then so on and so forth. All right, thank you for listening to this very long gap session about the books I've read. If you have any favorites or Just Why type of books from this year, I'd love to hear them in the comments. And if you have any spicy takes related to any of the books that I reviewed, do let me know. Otherwise, I will catch you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.